Story time. 2 Duke University students partied up all night, so they missed their chemistry exam. They went to the professor and claimed that they missed it because they had a flat tire which left them stranded on the side of the road, and they asked if they can get a makeup test. The professor thought for a moment and decided to give them a chance. They studied all night and came very well prepared the next day for the makeup. The professor sent them to 2 separate rooms to take the test, which consisted of 2 pages. The first page had 1 question worth 10 points. They solved it quickly and turned over the page to find the second question, which was worth 90 points. And the question said, which tire was it?
Fatality.
Now let's look at what's happening here. First of all, this story illustrates the pitfalls of lying. And you might feel that these students deserve what happened to them. They had it coming for being such liars. And if you're a professor, you might feel especially satisfied by the story and feel proud of that Duke professor.
My man.
If you are a student, you might be wondering what you would have done in such a situation. These students are in what we call a coordination game. To avoid failure, the students have to coordinate their answers and select the same tire. However, they cannot communicate, so they have to somehow guess what the other student would select. If they choose a tire at random, then the chance of matching their answers is 25%. Why? Well, there are 16 possible outcomes, and only 4 of them are positive. So we have 16 total combinations, and only 4 of them will be matching. So 4 out of 16 is 25%. Or think of it this way. A student chooses 1 tire, whatever the tire is. Now the chance of the other student matching it is 1 out of 4, because he has 4 tires to choose from. So there's a 1 in 4 chance that he will choose the same thing as his friend. So 1 out of 4, 25%. You hate math, don't you? So basically, there's a 75% chance that the students will fail the exam. Now, before we continue the discussion, let me introduce the concept of focal points. In game theory, a focal point, also known as a Schelling point after Harvard economist Thomas Schelling, is a solution that people tend to choose by default in the absence of any communication. To illustrate,
Do you want to play a game?
let's play a game. Imagine that you're supposed to meet your friend in Paris tomorrow, but you have no means of communication. So you cannot agree on a time and place. And if you succeed in meeting him, I will pay you $10,000. Where would you go? And at what time? The most common answer would be the Eiffel Tower at noon. Why? The Eiffel Tower is the most prominent landmark in Paris, and indeed it's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word Paris. So you figure that your friend will think the same. So that's the most likely location of the rendezvous. Now, what time? We said noon. Why noon? Well, noon and midnight are the 2 special times of the day. 12 a.m., 12 p.m. They have their own word. Noon, midnight. Any other time of the day is not special enough to have its own word. There's no word for 2 p.m. or 5 p.m., for example. Now you might be wondering, okay, why noon, not midnight? Well, midnight is way too late, and also access to the Eiffel Tower might be closed by midnight. So noon seems like the logical answer, and you figure that your friend might reason along the same lines. So you show up the next day at the Eiffel Tower at noon and collect the $10,000. Try playing that game with your friend in your own city and see if you choose the same thing. You might even have a special kind of focal point based on your history with that friend. So for example, Joey and Ross will most likely choose Central Perk as their rendezvous point. Here's another example. If you and your friend select the same square in this grid, I will give you $10,000. I don't know why I'm giving my money away so liberally in this video. Which one would you choose? The most common answer is the center square. Because it's out of the 9 squares, the one in the center is the most special, so it stands out. And you think your friend is thinking along the same lines, and you would go for the center square. That's the most likely answer. So back to our lying students. Are they doomed to a mere 25% chance of succeeding? Or is there a focal point that they can converge on? So if I were to select a tire, I would think that the most likely tire to go flat is the front right tire. Why is that? Well, the right side of the street is closer to the sidewalk, and it is more likely to have a sharp object like a nail fall from there onto the street. So that nail will more likely be on the right side. Now, why the front tire and not the rear tire? Well, if there's a nail on the street, the front tire is more likely to pick it up than the rear tire. Therefore, front right would be my guess. But can I count on the other student to think like that? Interestingly, A classroom survey showed that 58% of students selected front right, 11% chose front left, 18% selected rear right, and 13% selected rear left. So if you do the math, the chance of matching their answers is 40%. So if they're just guessing randomly, the chance of matching their answers is 25%. But in reality, more often than not, people choose front right. So the chance of matching is 40%, which is not great, but it's an improvement. In case you are curious how we got to 40%, here's how it's calculated. You hate math, don't you? By the way, while I have a problem with what the students have done, well, 1, they were irresponsible and missed their exam. 2, they lied. 3, they weren't smart enough to coordinate their stories. But I also have a problem with what the professor has done. After all, he was not certain that they were lying. They might have been telling the truth.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
And this professor has handed them 90 points for free. Maybe they did have a flat tire. So even if they didn't study for the exam, they would have scored at least 90%, which is very unfair for the hardworking students in the class. If I were the professor, Professor Shades, if I were the professor, I would have given them 10 proper questions and ended the test with the 11th multiplier question as follows. Question 11, which tire was it? 1 point. And then I will explain. Your score on the 10 previous questions will be multiplied by your score on this question. So if they get it wrong, meaning they were lying, they get a 0 on this question. So they multiply their score for the 10 previous questions by 0, they end up getting a 0 on the exam. If they get it right, which means they score 1 on question 11, then you multiply the score on the previous 10 questions by 1, which doesn't change the score. So in short, if they were lying, they get a 0 on the exam. If they were telling the truth, it doesn't hurt their grade, but it doesn't improve their grade either. So they don't get free bonus points if they were telling the truth, but they get severely punished if they were lying. And that would teach them a lesson, not to mess with Professor Shades. The bottom line is, the students should have been more responsible and not missed their exam. And given that they decided to lie, they should have at least predicted what their opponent, the professor, might have done and coordinated their stories accordingly. I'm not advocating that they should lie, but I'm just treating this as a game for the sake of this video. In games of strategy, you have to predict what your opponent is going to do and what your ally is going to do and make your moves accordingly. So, what would you have done in this situation if you were the professor? What would you have done if you were the student? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. Please comment below. So if they were truthful, this smart professor has given them English,
do you speak it?
second question, which was worth 90 points. I kind of hesitated with the numbers. I was gonna do like 90. I can't even count on my fingers. What's wrong with me today? Fatality. Let's play a game. And cut. And cut. That's a wrap. That's enough. 1 hour and 10 minutes.